Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Borderline Madonna, and it's a perfect segue talking about the border on this edition of The Law Show. We're speaking with Gordon Maynard and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver, and we are focusing on the border. And I, before the break, talked about, I'm going to give you a scenario, and would the border services be allowed to look or asked to look at my phone or my computer? I'm a member of Nexus. I travel a lot. I come across the border. I go through. I make a declaration on my card. I have nothing to declare. I have already passed the pre-screening for Nexus, and I go to the border and they say, "Hey Zach, come here. We want to look at your cell phone and your laptop." I have, I have already, I'm already pre-cleared for the Nexus system. Would they have a right to do that?
Not unless there was a customs issue that they could point to that they're worried about. I think you are, because you're a Canadian citizen, Zach.
Yeah.
They can't rely on the,
well, if I was then it couldn't be for permanent residents to get the Nexus card, right?
Well, but if you're an American citizen with no status in Canada,
and you're coming through with Nexus, right? Yeah.
And you're coming through with Nexus, and there was some other issue that they were concerned about, then it would be, the authority that they would have would be greater, because the purpose of your entry is in question. So regardless of the fact that you've been pre-screened.
So if I'm pre-screened for Nexus, I'm a Canadian citizen, I'm coming across the border, and they ask me to look at my cell phone, I should have the right to say no? And how do you think that would go down?
It hasn't been determined.
Hasn't been determined. I mean, Gordon will mention a case to you, but my point here remains the same, that their ability to do that is much more limited than the ability of somebody who is a foreign national to do it too, because the purpose of your entry is no longer in question, unless they think, you have a fraudulent passport or something like that.
Right. Okay, what do you want to cite this case?
Sure. There was a Quebec fellow, Alain Philippon. I'm assuming he's a Canadian citizen, and he was entering through Halifax Airport. And he was asked, they wanted to search his BlackBerry, and they asked for his code to open the phone, and he refused, and he was charged, I believe under the Customs Act. And that matter is going before the court. Last I heard, it was going before the court in August of this year, and we'll see whether or not the court says that Customs had the authority to demand that he provide a code so they could examine his phone.
So would that judgment have bearing on the rest of the border?
It would have bearing across Canada.
It would.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, what we don't know is all the details of that case. Under what circumstances were they asking?
All right.
It may be constrained by that.
Now, the form we all fill out at the border says you have, what are you bringing back? Booze, cigarettes, anything over your allotment. If it's 48 hours, I think it's $750, right? The other one is, do you have $10,000 or more that you are bringing into the country? So show me the money, as they say. Why are they so interested in money?
Right. So in 2003, Canada passed an act called the Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering Act. And I'm going to return to that act in just a second. So our general customs regime has made a distinction between the rights people have and the rights stuff has.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff, generally speaking, has fewer rights than people do. So when we're talking about these things in context of charter, etc., the courts have pretty consistently come down with there being considerably less protection for things than there are for people. Okay? So police come to your house, no warrant. If they go in, anyway, well, anything they search and anything that's related to that, unless you've invited them in, it can't hold on to it, they can't use it against you, except in very limited circumstances. In the context of the border, however, they can go through your stuff under the rubric of, hey, we're looking at whether or not you're in compliance with customs laws
and that's when they
Canada.
open your suitcase and
right,
say you're
exactly.
bringing in fresh meats and things like that, right?
That's right, exactly. So the Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering Act deals with monetary instruments, which are things at the end of the day. The law is written in such a way that you are actually required to declare any form of monetary instrument. That does not just include money. It includes bank drafts, traveler's checks, anything that's easily convertible, gold bars, anything that's easily convertible into money, a monetary instrument, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
That has to then be declared. If you have more than $10,000, you have to declare it and either make an oral declaration, or if you're traveling outside of Canada, because this applies leaving or entering Canada.
Really? I didn't
Okay,
know that. I
yes.
thought it was just coming in.
Whether you leave or you enter, you need to declare the money. And how do you do it if you're leaving? You have to fill in an I believe it's a 677 form. That's a special form where you explain that you have the money with you and you report the that the money is yours or who it belongs to, and to some extent you provide the provenance of the money.
So, but there's nothing wrong with bringing more money in.
Absolutely
you just have to
not.
say that
you have to declare it.
Right.
If you declare it, you have fulfilled the requirements of the Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering Act. If you have not declared it, however, you may run into a mountain of trouble, as you have probably seen
Yes.
on the show that you're referring to.
Mm-hmm.
If you are over $10,000 and you have not declared the money and it's discovered at secondary, you could be subject to a fine. That fine goes higher if they find it after you've misrepresented yourself and have the money concealed. There's a higher level of fine if there's concealment. And if there's reasonable grounds to suspect, which in Canada is a remarkably low threshold, that this is proceeds of crime, maybe because you have no explanation as to where the money's come from, or your tax returns don't justify the amount, or something of that sort, they can seize the money on the reasonable grounds to believe standard, or reasonable grounds to suspect standard, as proceeds of crime. That doesn't happen that often, but it happens enough that there's a body of case law that's developed around it since 2003, and there's serious consequences. People regularly lose all the amount that they're bringing in because they haven't declared it.
So at the end of the day, just because you're bringing it to the border doesn't mean anything that you bring to the border doesn't mean you're allowed to come across.
That's right.
Because you're separate from your stuff.
Now,
even as a Canadian citizen?
Yes.
It's the same?
The challenge we've seen with some clients, I had a case where the person knew that the U.S. rule, which is 10,000 U.S.,
right,
applied, so they had 10,000 U.S. on them.
Sure.
They weren't allowed into Canada.
Because that was 13 or 14,000.
They weren't allowed into the United States because the chauffeur driving this gentleman was inadmissible to the U.S. So they were turned back into Canada. And in Canada, he was asked if he had more than 10,000 in currency, and not understanding that this is the same money that left with him, he said no, and they fined him because he's actually left Canada. He went to the U.S., and now he's coming back in, and although he had this 10,000 U.S. when he went back, he didn't declare it on the way back, and he was subject to penalties for that.
All
and
right.
His penalties were heavy, $2,000.
So, with our last minute here, border, what are your 30,000-foot observations, and what should people be aware of?
Make sure that you declare things that you're bringing in, especially if they're on that list. You're much better off declaring, even if you're not sure that you should, and dealing with that problem later, than saying that you don't have something when it turns out later that you do. This will kill your Nexus card. This will eliminate your ability to participate in frequent flyer traveler programs. The risk of a false declaration on both the money and on the customs side is very, very heavy.
Gordon, anything else?
Yeah. Tell the truth.
Yeah.
If you know there's issues.
Well, that's coming back to this TV show, which I think is sort of been very educational for a lot of people, is just be upfront. If you're upfront, you have a much better shot at the border.
Yeah. Yeah, the border can facilitate.
Well, and final word on this, they do know a lot about you. They have access to the FBI computer system, NCIC. They have access to all kinds of information, not at their fingertips, but within 8 or 9 minutes they can discover it. So if you have a prior history that you're worried about, consult with someone before you buy the cruise ticket. Before you pay for some non-refundable flight to X or Y place, because you might not be able to go.
That's good advice. Thank you very much, guys. Gordon Maynard and Alex Stojkovic have been joining me from Maynard, Kisher, and Stojkovic Immigration and Citizenship Law, also known as MKS in downtown Vancouver. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll have you back again. That is the Law Show for this week. We'll speak to you next time on CL 650.